The Big Ten is on a journey to not only be the most premier conference in college football, but also the conference that provides the most talent, aka the pipeline to the NFL, you might be able to say. Now, one thing that's not been discussed a lot out there in the media and stuff like that is that there's been some chatter, some buzz behind the scenes that the Big Ten's been rather aggressively trying to move much more toward the pro style type of system and everything else with their type of play and their conference and everything that they do there. So one thought process has been, well, what if they get into some type of agreement or partnership with the NFL? And so with that happening, there was some discussions today because obviously the nationwide footprint that we've talked about here on the show before has been mentioned multiple times, making this more of an NFL like type of league and stuff, and going through those similarities and how they can operate there. And obviously, as we've talked about here, the Big Ten wants to continue to expand and become more nationwide. They did not want to end with USC and UCLA. They continue to add Washington and Oregon. And as we know, they're most likely going to go to the ACC and add some more at some point with some years down the road once the buyout begins to decrease with those ACC teams, providing everything stays the same. But, that kind of stuff happening. And we'll talk more, a little bit of conference realignment stuff in the ACC here at the end of the episode in the third segment there. But basically the Big Ten not only wants to be like the NFL, but they want to partner with mutual benefits to the NFL, positioning the Big Ten as the top pipeline while solving many of the challenges that are presented in the college football game today. Now, if you have been paying attention to the Super Bowl coverage at all, you know that Commissioner Roger Goodell did meet with the media on Monday and talked with them about some of the things going on, and obviously in the NFL, the Super Bowl. But one media member, I assume they must have heard some of this chatter behind the scenes with the NFL possibly getting more involved with college football, maybe the Big Ten being a partner, a potential partner for that whole situation. So we asked, what are your thoughts on what's going on in college football, and do you think that the NFL could help out? Well, Roger Goodell's quote says, quote, "There's obviously been a lot of change going on and a lot of disruption, and they do need to bring some clarity to it." He goes on, "If for some reason we could be helpful with the right people, we would obviously be willing to engage with anybody." All right. So I think that's really important to understand kind of what he's talking about there. Obviously, didn't give a huge long answer and they didn't spend a whole lot of time on it. He's there to talk about the Super Bowl, the NFL. And so not a whole lot of people continue to ask about it. But the idea from the quote of the NFL being ready to engage if invited is the perfect setup for this Big Ten partnership. If so, the Big Ten does want to pursue it because Goodell obviously wants the college football game to work and to go well. Not because a lot of people think they wouldn't want that because they're competition to the NFL, but in reality, the college football game works very well with the NFL and gives them a lot of what they want. And Roger Goodell has a history of trying to implement NFL practices into college football with professional development, like the NFL Coach Outreach Program that has expanded to impact about 60% of FBS programs. But obviously, they don't want to just be involved in 60%. They want to get more involved in all of college football and the FBS specifically. And what better way to do that than with partnering with a conference to make something like that happen? And the college game continues to evolve and be more like the NFL than it ever has before. And I know this isn't going to be very popular to some people because they say, well, we don't want the NFL, we want college football. And there are certain aspects of college football that will never go away and still make it college football, but there are aspects of the game that are currently changing and becoming more NFL light. Obviously, direct compensation for players, revenue sharing, it models the NFL kind of salaries and how players get those. Obviously, it's not the same in the college football. It's much messier, and that's something that they would probably want to try and fix at some point. And if the Big Ten did bring in the NFL, they might be able to have some of these contracts be more ironclad. And although the Big Ten does seem to have the most ironclad contracts in college football, look at the example of Damon Williams, there is still improvement of where they can get better, especially seeing the way things have played out with other players this cycle, like a Darian Mensah. There is free agency in college football, right? The transfer portal, it's kind of akin to the NFL roster moves and everything else. And you're seeing rosters being flipped over in college football, not at the same rate that they are in the NFL. About 60% of NFL rosters generally change from year to year. You're not seeing quite that much in college football at some of the bigger programs, but when a coach leaves or whatever else, you are seeing more and more of this. And heck, in college basketball, you're seeing entire teams enter the transfer portal and get away. And for, like it happened to Indiana this year, they had to bring in an entire new team to come in and play there, which obviously is not exactly the most fun thing in the world for the fans who enjoy getting to know these players, rooting for them, seeing them progress and develop, things like that. The game is becoming more like NFL football as well. The technology in it with, the communication to the quarterback and everything else, the rules, the game structure, that's becoming more NFL-like. And then also, I know nobody wants to talk about it happening, but it is happening that the playoffs are becoming more like the NFL as well. Now, I don't think you're ever going to get the, size of the playoff percentage of college football like they do with the NFL or anything like that, but they're talking about 16, 24 teams in the college football playoffs, and that does, replicate some of what you see in the NFL with them having about half of their league in the playoffs. But again, you're not going to have that same percentage going on there. So the Big Ten leader in charge, Tony Petitti, obviously he likes the model of the pro leagues. He comes from the MLB. He's a former executive there in the MLB, and he's obviously pushing for a larger playoff and wanting more of this NFL type of stuff to happen, not just in the Big Ten, but in all of college football overall, because it does, give them more money. Again, not saying I want this to happen, just giving you, what's going on and what Tony Petitti is kind of going for. All of it is revenue focused. All of it is focused on markets and how can schools make more money so they can pay players and have more success and make more money for the entire conference. There is a Power Four priority here, obviously. But even though there are two conferences in the Big Ten and the SEC that do get kind of more favor and have more dominance, you are still seeing a bit of an NFL structure with four major conferences, similar to kind of how you have divisions in the NFL. You are seeing, again, at a much larger scale, some of that in college football as well. And like I said, the NFL has a vested interest in college sports, in college football overall. The NFL cares because it's an unmatched farm system that everybody else does not have. The NBA has college basketball to a certain extent, but they also have the G League and how that whole thing works out for them. The MLB has their farm system, but it's not nearly as popular or lucrative as college football in the way it is. And so the NFL sits here at a spot where they have essentially free development. They get fan loyalty coming with many of these players to the NFL, which brings a lot of people to not, maybe they don't watch the games a ton, but they're buying jerseys, they're buying gear, they're buying merch. And you might be a Cleveland Browns fan, but if Carnell Tate is drafted by the Tennessee Titans, then you might watch some more Tennessee Titans games, right? So the coach or the overall situation is a farming system, and it is a farming system for coaches as well, as many coaches do kind of earn their stripes in college football and make their way up to the NFL. Not all of them, obviously, they can start in the NFL and do the Arthur Smith thing and stuff like that as well. But there are coaches that go, Jeff Hafley is one. There's a multitude of other coaches who started in college football, got to the NFL, and have either stayed there or spent a long time in the NFL. And so the current NFL support makes sense, but not everybody is as involved with the NFL support as you might think. There is actually a conference that does have an NFL partnership with their conference, and that is the Big 12. They have a partnership with the Big 10, which does not make this to be something that is super unlikely. The Big 10 could possibly get into an even greater partnership, as right now the Big 12 is in a partnership that essentially helps them with officiating, analytics, and trying to grow their conference more globally, as that's what the NFL has been doing a lot with London, Mexico, different places like that as well. But the Big Ten doesn't want just that. They want to be the premier pipeline that goes from the Big Ten to the NFL. They are not content with just dominating college football and winning national championships. They also want the NFL to recognize them as this is where we're going to get the majority of our players. This is where players should want to go if they do want to play in the NFL someday, which obviously, if that happens, you're going to get the most talent in all of college football, which would make you likely the most prominent, most dominant conference in all of college football if you have the good coaching to go along with it. Now, this partnership blueprint is not, it's kind of like the Big 12 one on steroids a little bit. Now, we don't know everything that it would entail, but we do know that the Big Ten has a few areas where they feel like they could see some help and working with the NFL. One of them, like I mentioned earlier, contracts and trying to figure out, okay, how do we get these players signed to contracts so that way they're able to work these things out? Is there a way that we can get collective bargaining so that way it works out for all of college football? And the Big Ten would try to lead that race to get everybody more involved. And then obviously the global growth, the officiating, things like that we talked about. Player development as well is something that the Big Ten would be interested in here to try and get their players to be more likely to move on to the NFL. And of course, if your players are more likely to move on to the NFL, that makes you more likely to get the most talented players in all of college football. So it's a mutual win-win for both sides. And at this point, there's no for sure that it's going to happen or anything, but there is chatter going on that something like this could happen between the Big Ten and the NFL. And if it does happen, it would obviously be very good for the Big Ten. And it's just one more way that Tony Petitti is working outside the box. The public capital situation with UC Investments was one thing that they were kind of doing. And this other thing with the NFL trying to work out a way that they can both mutually benefit from one another, create the most talented conference in college football, and also, give them a step up above other teams would be super beneficial for them. Again, not saying we necessarily want college football to turn into the NFL or anything like that, but if we're being honest about where college football is going and how the Big Ten has presented themselves, they do want to be more kind of NFL light. And if they make that happen, you could see a partnership with the Big Ten and the NFL coming in the future. Let me know what your thoughts are in the comment section below. If you're in the chat with us, let me know what your thoughts are, but it would be very interesting for something like this to happen. And it could drastically change college football. And to my knowledge, this is not the only conference that the SEC is looking at doing this with. The Big 12 is not super special in that way, but it does sound like the Big 10 is interested in doing something like this, which would be very beneficial for them, especially if they're the only conference that's doing it.